Hey, welcome to Guitar Knobs, the guitars, gear, noise, and nonsense podcast, hosted today by these knobs.
Tony Dudzik, Pick Guardian.
Jared down in Nashville.
Is that Irish? What is it?
You just can't continue on. It's never live it down. Never let me live
Hey,
it
everybody,
down.
it's me, Todd Novak. Welcome to the Guitar Knobs podcast. We're thrilled to death that you are listening to our little show.
Podcast.
Yes. We are...
Hey, Todd.
Yes.
I brought someone along with me today.
That's right. I was about to ask who the person on the line is, but we already know who that is. It's Jared down in Nashville.
No.
But sitting
it's,
right across from us,
It's my buddy Steve.
Steve.
Introduce
That's me.
yourself.
Well, I'm Steve Graves.
Yes.
From Columbus, Ohio,
Yes.
and friend of Tony's. And
Yes. Well, that gets you on automatically.
Yeah.
exactly.
Steve is very humble. He has forgotten
We'll get...
more about guitars than most people.
We're going to touch on what...
know.
Okay, gotcha.
You got to
first of
go
all-
Todd space. Come on.
First of all, Tony,
Yes.
what are a few things that people can experience if this is the first time you're listening to this show? If
God help you.
true, but what can people expect on this podcast?
Well, you know, Todd, we like to talk about gear. We like to talk about guitars and amps and pedals and accessories, all the good stuff. And more importantly, we like to talk about the builders and talk to the builders
Yes.
of this gear.
And what else, Jared?
We like to do 101s and learn cool stuff.
Well, rumor
What
has it
Jared
we're
and-
doing that today, Jared. You're in
That's
luck.
right.
Because
I
today
love 101s.
we're going to do, by popular demand, a Gretsch 101 episode.
Oh, wow.
Gretsch.
I am really excited about this. This is one of those kind of funky brands that people just love but maybe don't fully understand, like me. So, yes, this is going to be very exciting. And Tony is going to crack his mental knuckles and show us all what's lurking in the back of his brain. You know, we always...
No,
we always
not all that stuff.
We always say, yeah, not that one. And that's
That's
separate,
my other brain.
That's a separate line. You know, we talk all the time about how Tony kind of just has an extreme amount of knowledge about gear and guitars and rock and roll history and the whole 9 yards. And so I was really excited when he said, hey, let's do a Gretsch 101. And I was like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we also brought on your buddy Steve here.
Yeah,
So-
because Steve, I won't say he knows as much as I do.
I probably don't.
No, but as I was saying earlier, I think Steve has forgotten more guitar stuff than most people will ever know.
Maybe.
Most-
I'm going to interrupt myself introducing the Steve. But when we were just saying the Gretsch 101,
Yes.
if you are new to the show, or maybe you haven't heard a 101, what is a 101?
It's a deep dive into, in this case, the history of a brand.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, as Jared said earlier, we talk about necks and pickups
Parts
and different things like that. But
and-
we've had a couple of really good episodes. In fact, one not too long ago on Rickenbackers.
And Japanese pedals.
And Japanese pedals. So
And we've done speakers and vintage amps, but learn what to look out for when you're buying a vintage amp.
Oh, yeah.
Tubes, all the whole 9 yards. We've done
Yep.
we've done quite a few.
Yeah.
When it comes to the brands, though, it's really I think that's fun because that's we love the lore of these brands, and it's always fun to find out things that are maybe not total common knowledge. So
That's right.
the 101, not unlike a college class, is not the expert class.
Right.
We're not going to cover every single thing.
Oh, yes, we are.
We're going to cover close to every single thing. But
Did you see the outline I sent you?
I know, but bare minimum, if you don't have a great knowledge, hopefully you come away with it. I know I'm going to be really excited because there's a lot I don't understand about Gretches. And so you're going to be right there with me. We can look at each other and say, did you know that? I didn't know that. Now we know that.
So what would you like to know about Steve, Todd?
Well, I'm assuming he's sitting here because he knows a lot about guitars. I have a feeling he's owned a few guitars. I have a feeling he's owned a few Gretsch guitars.
That would be an understatement.
I know that he's regularly hanging out with you at shows and stuff.
Yeah. He also helps me out at the shop a couple days a week.
Yep.
So some of the fine polishing work. I mean, look at his fingers.
I'm assuming
the
he's
poor guy.
a pretty fair player.
Yes. And I would say you probably have more guitars than I do at this point in time.
It's entirely possible. I can't tell you exactly how many, but I can tell you that it probably runs into 3 figures.
3 figures.
Wow.
That's nuts, man.
It is. You're absolutely right, Jared.
That's awesome. I love that. That's fantastic. How about, do you know about roughly how many Gretches you own?
Well, currently I only own 1 Gretsch, but I have owned probably 4 over the course of my guitar collecting
Well, that's
career.
4 more than I have. So
Do you want to know how many I own?
I do. Yes, tell me.
So right now I have 1, 2, 3.
Now he's flexing.
I have 4 or 5 right
It took
now.
you that long to count to 4 or 5?
Well, because I had to go through
I mean, I was
visually.
expecting like what, 15, 20? And
No. Well, over the years now, I've owned a lot of. I've owned some vintage Gretsches.
Yep.
I've owned a lot of Japanese Gretsches.
Yes.
I own a couple of the newer Korean Gretsches,
Yes.
and we'll talk a little bit more about those.
Aside from owning those Gretches,
Yes.
and
playing them.
You, by nature of what you've done for your career, is you handle guitars every day from all over the world, from all kinds of players, from all makes and sizes and models and everything. So you've probably had your hands on as many Gretsches as anybody who works in a Gretsch factory, I imagine, at this point.
Well, I wouldn't say in a Gretsch factory, but certainly probably as many
trying to hype you up, Tony.
as most dealers have touched Gretches.
Sure.
I mean, with some exceptions. I know there's some people that specialize in that sort of thing, but no, I've tried. I've owned a lot. I've tried a lot, and so yeah,
I've tried to own a lot. It hasn't worked out. Anyways, okay, let's have a few announcements real quick. We need to thank Road. All right. Jared on the late bus. There we go. Thank you, Jared. We said we need to thank Rode because they supply our musical equipment, and we are really, really happy that they do that.
Don't forget about the Rodecaster Pro.
The Rodecaster Pro, the Procaster mics, the NT, the mini USB mics, and it's really great stuff. So,
what about articulating arms? Do we have those?
We do have those articulating arms,
I
not
do
only
love
on
them.
our bodies, but on the desk holding the mics right now.
Very nice.
This is true. And then Jared's got a different one altogether, a Rode mic over there in Nashville.
That's right.
Wow.
They've taken really good care of us, and the products will take good care of you. So if you're interested in getting a good microphone in front of your face, I would highly suggest checking into Rode. Thanks, Nick, down in Australia. I also want to bring up something that is, unfortunately, top of mind right now. And it's weird. Like, I'm happy to do this, and I'm also sad to have to do this. This is for Pedals for Ukraine. David Gehring of Effects Layouts, as I mentioned, talked to me about this, and we've mentioned it a couple times. We're going to keep doing it for a little while because it seems like things aren't really getting a whole lot better for that situation right now. So I'm just going to read this little piece, if you don't mind. We are a collective of effects pedal makers who have come together to raise money for humanitarian causes. Auctions are going on for handmade pedals from some very talented builders. This is true, and the number of builders is growing all the time. Here's how it works. Bidding will be done in the comments of each auction post on Instagram. The winning bidder will use the provided link to make a donation directly to one of the charities that we are going to name off. And then the winning bidder will provide proof of donation, and you will win the pedal. They have decided to focus on the following charities: the World Central Kitchen, the USA for UN Relief Agency, and Doctors Without Borders. The website the email is pedalsforukraine@gmail.com, and the same for Instagram. There's a lot of people that really need our help, and by you choosing to get probably a one-off handmade pedal, you get to be able to do that as well. So consider doing that if you're on the hunt for something new and feel like that hunt would actually help somebody else out too. Thank you so much to the builders that are doing this and for organizing it for the rest of us to take part in.
Now, I don't know if John Esterly is part of that group or not, but
he is.
He has. I've seen some of his postings that he's getting ready to ship out his special Ukrainian cyborg pedals that are in the Ukrainian flag colors, and he was early on, and it's a really limited edition. He's donated a significant sum of money to humanitarian efforts too.
Yeah.
So hats off to John at Rare Buzz Effects.
Yes, indeed. All right, and let's find out what's going on in our music worlds this week, and then we're going to bypass the 4 on the floor because let's just get to it.
Got to get to the meat.
Tony's going to kick us off. Then we'll hear from our friend Steve, and then jump over to Jared.
Cool. Well, in addition to reading and rereading all of my manuscripts to prepare for this wonderful episode, I'm trying to think. There hasn't been a whole heck of a lot, other than interestingly, I had a buddy that has a Gretsch guitar, and it's an old country club model, and he had some problems because the rings that they were using on there were tortoise, and they had gassed off, and it actually ate some of the paint.
What does that mean when a gas is off?
It's basically the celluloid self-destructing.
Okay.
So it's
because celluloid is
it's an unstable material.
Okay.
I mean, always was, always will be.
Right.
And
for those that don't know what celluloid is,
it is celluloid nitrate. In this
Right.
case, there's also celluloid
film used to
acetate.
be made out of that.
Oh yeah, that's why there's such a serious problem in archives.
In archiving vintage film.
Yeah, and they're
So
very, it becomes
it's
very
a very
flammable,
volatile
yes,
plastic type thing.
And it's interesting. I was talking to Lindy Fralin about celluloid, and he said, that stuff burns underwater. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, we caught a piece on fire and dumped it in a bucket, and it continued to burn.
Wow.
So it creates its own oxygen. So it literally will burn underwater.
That's amazing.
So you have to be very careful with it.
If anybody has seen the movie Inglourious Bastards, which if you haven't, I could not more highly recommend watching that. But you'll know a scene that I'm talking about where things go absolutely crazy with fire, and that is simply because of a single match in a giant pile of
film
nitrocellulose.
Yeah.
Film.
So, long story even longer. His guard, it was a nice old Gretsch guard, but it had in one portion the paint had literally been eaten away from the back of the guard. So we had a couple of options. One, of course, was to strip the paint off the back or sand the paint off the back and reshoot it. And I given it some thought, I just said, I told Jeff that we really ought to just make a new guard. You keep it, I mean, the one that you have is not pretty, but it's an original. So I ended up making basically an exact duplicate, or as close as I could duplicate of it, and shot the back with gold. And he was very pleased with the end result. So
awesome. Fantastic.
One of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later on here in the Gretsch 101.
Awesome. All right. Steve, how about yourself? Anything exciting going in your music world this week?
Well, I think what I would like to talk about briefly is something I've been involved with for actually a couple of years. The Columbus Historical Society has put together an exhibit of what they're calling the 70s music explosion in Columbus. And this is an exhibit that contains all manner of artifacts from local bands in the 70s. And
are you Columbus native?
I'm a Columbus native, so I think that's one of the reasons I was recruited for this committee. It's because I lived the 70s in Columbus and certainly lived the music scene. But this has been going on since October of last year. Will continue to be on exhibit, I think, through Labor Day is the plan. and there are a number of things covered. I mean, there is a room dedicated to kind of an overall national, international scene, if you will, of what the music situation was in the 70s. And there are 2 or 3 rooms that are focused on local acts, local music. And actually, a number of my guitars are there as part of the exhibit. I have been at the society like on Sunday afternoons, kind of being a docent, and it's been a real delight to see people's...
Are you a decent docent?
I try to be, but it's been a delight to see the reaction of many of the guests who, many of them are from around Ohio, many of them are from Columbus, and they've really gotten a kick out of it because it's brought back memories for them and things that they may not have known about the Columbus music scene and all this kind of thing. So for those of you who may be around Columbus or in Columbus or traveling through Columbus, admission is free. Takes it's a way to spend an hour. Check out Columbus History, www.columbushistory.org, and there are details and directions and all this kind of good thing. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for doing that, Steve.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
just in case anybody doesn't know what a docent is, it's when you go to the museum and there's suspicious people wearing suits doing seemingly nothing except saying, "Get away from that." That's a docent. They had to come up with a good word to say, "What's the person standing around doing all this stuff but not really doing anything?" We need a word. That's it.
Docent
it.
was the one, yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's cool. Jared, about yourself?
Other than still trying to figure out where I'm going to put these 4 hangers that hold 6 or 7 guitars. I got to get 2 more, but I need a new pair of headphones. So
Okay.
actually a couple pairs. So I've got this old pair of AKGs. Yeah, these are actually my dad's. They come out of his studio. But every time I'm done with a podcast, using them for a podcast, I take them off, and then I have this black stuff in my ears because they're kind of deteriorating and getting old.
Yeah.
And then I have a Bluetooth set of Bose, and they're doing the same thing. I mean, the headphones work great. They're comfortable. They sound great, but they're deteriorating. So I don't know what else to do.
Maybe it's
other
you.
than just buy new headphones. I have some sort of deteriorating acid that comes out of the skin around my
Are you
ears.
made of nitrocellulose?
I could be.
Yeah.
That might explain a few things.
Well, there's some good stuff out there, Jared. I mean, even our friends at Rode have made a really nice pair of headphones, and there are there's the whole spectrum from, relatively inexpensive to stupid expensive.
Yes.
And, try to find something in the middle that you like, that's comfortable.
Right on. Let's see.
What about,
you, Todd?
Well, my.
Do you need new headphones?
We do. We're working on a scenario for that. So, my friend who I hooked up the Vox AC30 for, and the Gullet guitars.
30 or 15?
He got it the AC30.
Oh, wow.
Anyways, he was using a really, well, I guess it was from the 90s or so, but it was the Boss, it was the yellow double pedal, all drive or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of stopped being functional.
Good.
His dad bought it for him, and there's some sentimental value there. But I said, man,
Makes a nice paperweight.
You've got an incredible guitar, and you've got a fantastic amp, and you need some pedals that will enhance that sound and work really well with it. And so we're just kind of starting to scope out what a couple drive pedals, some delay, and he probably doesn't need a ton, but just having a couple options and seeing what plays the nicest with the AC30 and some P90s. And he's kind of doing, I guess, kind of like lo-fi, almost like Steve Malcolmus or Pavement, that kind of stuff. Maybe even a little bit of Sonic Youth, some stuff like that. Maybe some Husker Du. And
does he talk like a regular guy?
I know him, and he does. So, anyways, that's kind of fun. I always love doing that.
Pavement humor.
Yeah. So that's been kind of fun. Just kind of noodling around and going, what is not going to, that he can get into and feel comfortable doing.
Yeah.
Because
it's not going to break the bank, but there's
there's a million pedals out there, and that's a tough one.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so hey, if you have, actually, if you've got an AC. Anything, if you got a Vox amp, and you have a particular drive pedal that you say, this sounds incredible, and it sounds like what we're talking about, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Let us know what you're using and what you really like.
Got another big burp right there, Mike.
What? All right. So,
Sorry.
what is that?
I don't know. What is it? Who did that?
Yeah. Anyways.
Turn it down, somebody.
Yeah. Turn it down, Sandy boy. Let's get on with this thing that we're going to call Gretsch 101. I don't have like a little doodad for that. Jared, do you got anything?
Gretsch 101.
Oh, I like that. That'll work. We'll keep it. Okay, Tony.
I can hardly wait for Gretsch 102.
Is yours.
Gretsch 101.
Gretsch 101.
Gretsch 101.
Steve?
No, he's out.
I can't top that.
He's not going to. He doesn't want to
Stevie,
overstep
don't play
his-
that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Gretsch Guitars. Now, Gretsch historically was not a guitar manufacturer.
Drums.
They manufacture. So let's go back to the late 1800s.
Did I jump too far ahead?
Well, you did sort of.
All
But
right.
Thanks for raining on my parade once again. Thanks, Todd. So back in the very beginning, Friedrich Gretsch came over from Germany in the late 1800s and moved to Brooklyn. Worked for a drum manufacturer in Brooklyn. Broke away in the 1880s and started the Fred Gretsch Instrument Company, or Fred Gretsch Enterprises. Fred Gretsch Company, whatever. He called it that. He wanted, he Americanized his name from Friedrich to Fred. But he basically started out in the world of making drums, tambourines, and banjos.
Right.
And some novelty kinds of things.
When those were needed for a stage at that time.
Yeah, and that they were popular. I mean, the banjo was, probably one of the most popular stringed instruments of the day.
Banjo was king in the day.
Yes, and it's also the most sensual of all instruments. So that really, that's kind of the late 1800s into the early 1900s. At the end of the 1800s, Friedrich was on a journey back to Germany with his brother, and he died. So his 15-year-old son, known as Fred Gretsch Sr. at this, in later years, basically dropped out of school, and at 15 years old, started running the Gretsch Company.
Wow.
Which is incredible in and of itself. It's from the fire to the frying pan, or back in frying pan into the fire, whatever you want. So he really
riveting so far, Tony.
Yes. Okay. as long as it's entertaining to you, Todd.
Well, it's just good to have an understanding. I mean, it wasn't something that came up in the
So I think we first start to see guitars show up in the 1930s. And again, that is pretty much in reaction to the decline in popularity of the banjo and the increase in popularity of guitars.
And what spawned that here?
Tell me, Todd.
The French jazz stuff. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Django.
Yeah. Ragtime.
Yep, and there obviously were others. So at that point in time, there were definitely gypsy jazz, there was American jazz, and the guitars of that era in the 1930s really were not electric guitars. That didn't come about until really the end of the 30s. But there's some great pictures and things. In fact, there's one of Django playing a Gretsch guitar. But as those, the guitars increased in popularity, and certainly as electric guitars increased in popularity in the late 30s into the 40s, that's when there's been a shift now to really a drum division and a guitar division. And over the years, they did make other instruments and some novelty types of things, toy guitars and things like that. But I think the focus we're going to talk about today is on mainly, and certainly the most popular, were the Gretsch electric guitars. We'll touch a little bit on some of the others, the basses and acoustics too. So really, what most people consider the classic years are the 1950s and the 1960s. And this is at a time where Chet Atkins becomes a major endorser. So really, what you had, in the 40s and into the 50s, Fred Gretsch Sr. decided to retire. One of his sons, Bill Gretsch, took over the reins. He died early, unexpectedly. So Fred Gretsch Jr. became really, and he came into power really at the end of the 40s, into the 50s and the 60s, and most people would consider the classic Gretsch years. At the end of the 60s, there apparently wasn't a suitable heir to the throne, so Gretsch was sold to Baldwin Organ Company. And most people would agree that the 1970s were not a good time for Gretsch under the tutelage of Baldwin, because they basically closed the factory down in Brooklyn, a 10-story building that Fred Gretsch Sr. built, and moved production to Arkansas. And most people would say that they could not build Gretsch guitars in Arkansas. And there's just some really unusual things. Now, some people like some of the gimmicky kinds of things that they came out with at that time frame. But I think most people agree.
Which we will get all into, so don't worry about it. We're just getting an overview right now.
Correct. That leads us into the 1980s.
Okay, let me just touch on something really quick. So the 70s, we hear, it's interesting because 70s was another explosion of rock and roll.
Yes.
Massive explosion of rock and roll. Proper rock and roll.
But it's also a time where most American guitar companies...
Gibson was not so bueno.
No.
Fender got owned by CBS.
Not so bueno.
Gretsch, and whom else was acquired by Baldwin?
Might have been Guild, because Avnet was like the parent company.
Yeah, so there was all these big companies gobbling up things that were really good
because
and making them bad.
Yeah, they wanted, everybody had to have a musical instrument company in their portfolio.
Yeah.
And, running a corporation, or a corporation trying to run whether it's a family business or somebody that's really interested in guitars in this case, by the time you push it through the accounting department, the end result is generally not good. So yeah, at Gibson you had the Northland Era in the 1970s.
I believe the corporate term for that is doo-doo.
Yes, you are correct.
I love that word.
In the early 80s, like 1983, Avnet, who owned Guild and also Gretsch, filed bankruptcy along with Baldwin Organ. And one of the executives at Baldwin actually bought the Gretsch name and hired
smart person,
an old timer to help run the company. Around 1985, Fred W. Gretsch, who is the current owner and president, he took over the reins in the 80s, and that leads us into the 90s and the early 2000s, which, to a lot of people, myself included, I think in some
big
cases,
resurgence.
well, there was a big resurgence, and it was an incredible increase in quality because they were being made in Japan and mostly made in the Terada factory, who also made a lot of Fender Japan things. But in my opinion, and a lot of other people's, the Japanese Gretsches that came out in the 90s and into the 2000s are some of the best Gretsch instruments ever made.
So just because it's old, don't mean it's good.
Yes, we'll talk more about that.
It's like you.
So, all in all,
Sorry.
and in the early 2000s, they struck a deal with Fender to oversee production, distribution, but they still, Fred W. Maintained the ownership. So the family still owns Gretsch, but Fender really is in charge of production and in the distribution side and product development. So it's kind of like they hired Fender to do, kind of some of the dirty work, I guess, in order to get the stuff out the door. And in some cases, because of Fender, there's a incredibly expansive line of guitars. Some that are made. They make a handful in the U.S., some that are still made in Japan, some in Korea, and some in China and Indonesia. So I think what they were able to do by opening it up to Fender in the 2000s is they were able to expand production facilities.
Yeah.
And offer, in a lot of cases, lower priced instruments, and hopefully maintain the quality and things.
I think it's also worth mentioning, when you're going back to the 80s era, that was still a time where videos and magazines were still reigning, pretty much supreme. And with a couple of key people gracing the pages and TV sets with a big giant Gretsch in hand, Billy Duffy and Brian Setzer.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. I mean, because they are, and it's fun to see.
just like what Tom Petty did for Rickenbacker.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Becker.
I mean,
Dang it.
It's fun.
Get it.
It's fun to see some of these wee
Orville
little guys
Redenbacher.
with a big Gretsch guitar strapped on.
So cool.
And it's and they're and in all honesty, most of them are very comfortable to play. Wouldn't you say, Steve? I mean,
I
the
would
hollow
say so.
bodies in particular are light. They sound great, despite being hollow. There's not. I've never really experienced a lot of problems with feedback. Have you?
I have not.
Yeah.
No.
And these don't have center blocks. I mean, they're a full hollow body guitar.
Yeah.
On that portion of the line. So that's a brief history of Gretsch and Gibson
There you go.
at the time. But one of the things that comes up all the time is people don't understand the Gretsch model number system. And quite honestly, it's like, it's kind of haphazard at best. What it stems from a lot, most of the guitars from the 1950s and 60s are in the 6000 series. So what I'm told is like 4000 series for catalog numbers were drums, 5000s were either acoustics or banjos or something
It's
like
like
that.
the kind of goofy Rickenbacker.
Yeah, I mean,
System.
it's even worse than Rickenbacker because generally speaking, you think of something like the classic 6120. That's the big body, usually the orange model that has the brand and things. That's
You mean the big G?
yeah, the big G brand, and guitarists like Eddie Cochran played that, and Dwayne Eddy played one as well before he shifted over to Guild, and of course Chet Atkins, who had several models and several models named after him. So generally speaking, in the 1950s and 60s. Like, for instance, let's use 6120. The 6 stands for guitar.
Okay.
The 1 stands for electric. And then the third and fourth digits are usually some combination of the model number and the color. So like a true 6120 would be the orange. There's a 6122. There's a 6124. So it gets crazy.
Right.
And like I said, there's generally not a lot of rhyme or reason to that numbering system because, you had full hollow body guitars, big bodies, and then you also had things like some of the, the Jets, and then full solid bodies, and they're all 61 blah 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 blah. And so, I, at some point you'd think they would have run out because of the color combinations and things that they did. And then, of course, there's always or usually a model name after the 61 whatever. So it gets a little confusing, but if you know what you're looking for, I think you can kind of narrow down the craziness a little bit. In the 1970s, in their infinite wisdom, Baldwin said, "Okay, let's change the 6 to a 7."
Oh boy.
Yeah. So, you have a lot of instruments that were made in the 70s that have that, it's a 7120 or 7122 or whatever. In the 1980s and 90s, the letter G was added to the usually what was the accepted, like the 6100 series. And that was to differentiate that between a true vintage piece and the actual reissue. And then, of course, in the 2000s, under Fender, you had 6,000 series. You had the 5,000 series, which was the Electromatic series, or still is the Electromatic series. And now, of course, we have the 2,000 series, which is the Streamliner series. So those are the least expensive of the Gretsch line, and then all the way up to the 6,000 series. So it gets a little confusing, and especially with the modern stuff, it gets very confusing.
I'm confused.
Basically, if you think about it, the 6,000 series are the true vintage reissues. The 5,000 series are pretty much inspired by many of the vintage models. The 2,000 series are really the entry level with some inspiration from vintage models.
Gotcha. I'm going to interject here and just because I know you have an agenda, which is good, and it's going to take us through this. I just wanted to find out from both of you, what do you think it is? Because every guitar that we like, every brand, all the history, there's usually an it factor for it. What is the it factor for the Gretsch? And I realize there's several different body styles and yada. But if you take that out of the equation, there are commonalities across all of the models. Mm-hmm. Those equate potentially the it factor, or is there something else?
Steve, you want to handle that?
Well, I'd be happy to start. I think with Gretsch's, for me. Well, let me backtrack for a second, because in terms of electric guitars, I tend to gravitate toward Telecasters and semi-hollows. So Gretsch's for me are kind of a nice in-between, in as much as I love a twangy guitar, and Gretsch's at their best will twang with the best of them. Mm-hmm. As Tony and I were saying earlier, they're really pretty comfortable to play. They're not overly heavy. In terms of an it factor, I think it's, like I say, for me, it's probably the twang factor. It's got that, not quite the sharpness of a Telecaster, but it's got a very country flavor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And, that translated, I think, to early rock and roll. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you had, people like Eddie Cochran playing them, and you had, of course, Chet Atkins, who, is in a league of his own in terms of style of music. I mean, he was termed a country artist, but, I mean, I think he's more of a jazz player. He was just an incredible guitar player. But I think when you think about a Gretsch, it's almost, in the world of rock and roll, like a big fat body Gretsch guitar is almost a contradiction in terms. So I think there's a lot of players that pick them up. Now there's some players like Setzer, for instance. All of his idols played Gretsch guitars.
Right.
And if you're in a rockabilly band,
you can't.
You'd better have a Gretsch guitar.
Better have a Gretsch. Yeah.
In the case of someone like Billy Duffy, I think that is almost. I think he liked the sound of it probably, but it was also,
it was a huge presence on stage.
Yeah, and I think it was almost a screw you kind of moment, where he says, "I'm going to play this. Check it out." And there's other bands too that that it does. Part of it is the sound, but I think most of it is the image and the look. And like I said, some of these
wanting something a little bit different. I mean, this is something that is common with my personal line of thinking. Is like if you're going to do it, for better or for worse, I usually try to find something that isn't exactly like everybody else has, and the things that we're going to go through, the idiosyncrasies and little nuances are the things that you can kind of relish, and Gretches are full of them.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
That they are.
I've got a big old list of idiosyncrasies.
So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
I think that's a fair question, because I think a lot of people look at it and they say, well, I could get that, or I can get a Gibson, or I could get, a Guild electric jazz box, or, any other number of things. And I think there's just something, it's the combination of the colors, it's the combination of the materials, like, who would think
Gretches are not guitars, apologetic guitars in any way, shape, or form.
No, especially if you go to something like a White Falcon
or a Silverjet, or
any of the, I mean, they are in your face guitars.
Yeah,
there's no doubt about that.
Let's just do a little toe dip. We're gonna hit models, pickups. We're gonna talk about vibratos. We got bridges, position markers, idiosyncrasies, players, pitfalls, and unsung heroes.
Yes,
we're gonna get through all that.
Are you sure we can fill an hour with that?
Yeah, let's do it.
So let's talk about models.
Yes.
So I think the guitar that comes to mind, at least to most people, to me especially, when you say Gretsch, is the big fat body jazz box. I think at the time, Chet Atkins was working with Gretsch to develop a jazz box that he could use. So the very first 6120s had a pickguard that said Gretsch, but in like a signpost it said Chet Atkins. So it was a true Chet Atkins model. Mm-hmm. That comes to mind for me. There's various derivatives. You mentioned the White Falcons,
right?
Country Gentleman, which was another version of that. A Tennessean, which also was part of that whole brigade.
But those are all varied widths and accessories.
Yeah,
and
they're pretty big body guitars.
Yeah,
and various thicknesses too.
Yes,
like the 6120s are pretty thick. The Country Gentlemen are very thin.
It's more like a 335.
Yeah, closer to the 335. Yeah. Exactly. One of the things, so that's the hollow body line. There's the jet line. So you think of like Duojets. You think of Jet Firebirds, things like that. Most people think that those are solid body guitars.
Yes.
And if you think that, you'd be wrong.
Interesting.
Because most of the Jets are actually a mahogany back that has all the stuff scooped out for the pickups and the controls and everything. And on top of that is glued a pressed plywood maple top.
Right.
So there's empty space underneath
so you think
it.
like Malcolm Young or Billy Zoom.
Exactly. Yeah. Those are, I call them semi-hollows because of the way they're constructed. They were meant to look like they were full solid body guitars to compete with, the Gibson Les Pauls at the time. So those are very interesting guitars, and of course the manufacturing varied over the years. So there's there's some variations thereof. But if you want to think about that, now they're also offered true solid body guitars, things like the Gretsch Corvettes. And there's a couple of derivatives there. They made some for Bo Diddley. Everybody kind of knows the rectangular guitar,
right? Or
the Jupiter, which they made originally for Bo Diddley, and then Billy Gibbons resurrected that. So those are true solid bodies. They also made basses, not very popular, at least in most circles. Probably the only person I know that played one would have been Peter Tork from the Monkees. And that was part of an endorsement deal, I think. And then they also made a line of acoustics. Again, not hugely popular, but they're kind of cool in some ways. Like, for instance, the Gretsch Rancher was a flat top, had an adjustable bridge, but it had a kind of a triangular sound hole, which was really cool.
Oh.
So, but I think the main focus of what we'll be talking about will be on the electrics.
Yeah.
And whether they be full hollow bodies, jets, or...
Yeah, those other things bore me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you'd probably dig the Rancher.
Yeah, maybe.
Because it's got that triangular thing there. Okay. It's different. It's very different.
No, I get it.
Okay. Jared, did you want to talk about pickups?
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's talk pickups in terms of Gretsches. So early on, most of the models had de-arm-on pickups. They called them Dynasonics when it made it over to the Gretsch side. But essentially, they were the same single coil, adjustable pole piece, de-arm-on pickups that you'd find in other guitars.
Right, and adjustable just being they're all screws.
Yeah. And Rowe Industries made de-arm pickups.
That's
and
right.
Rowe Industries were located in
beautiful Toledo, Ohio.
The Glass City.
Yes. Well, you talked about adjustable pole pieces. The one cool thing about them, Todd, is while the pole pieces themselves were magnets, they had a little screw that had a mechanism that raised and lowered the actual pole piece. So you didn't screw like on a Gibson where you would adjust the height of the screw.
Right.
The screw actually has a spring that goes down underneath and a little arm, and that's connected to the pole piece, which raises and lowers based on where you turn the screw.
Do we know what year those were developed?
I would say that those came out really in maybe late 40s, but certainly into the 50s.
Seems excessively complex.
Because I know
cool.
Gibson had drawings of their staple pickups, which functioned the same way in 1952.
Yeah. So I think that those, I think there was a lot of activity in the late 40s in terms of developing pickups for guitars because it was a brand new industry.
Yeah.
But certainly by the 50s, I think de-arm-on was pretty well into manufacturing, and they made them for a lot of other companies too. Around 1954, and this is a critical year because there is some controversy over who came up with the humbucking pickup. Was it Ray Butts, who worked for Grech, or Seth Lover, who worked for Gibson?
Seth Lover.
Well, you may have been brainwashed into that, but
no,
Gibson was faster at filing the paperwork, but there are actually photos of prototypes that Ray Butts was developing along with Chet Atkins. Some people would consider it the first humbucking pickup, which they were almost developed simultaneously. Seth Lover was doing stuff, Ray Butts was doing stuff, but Gibson beat Gretsch to the punch. And then one of the interesting controversies of this was at some point Gibson was going to pursue preventing Gretsch from using Filtertrons because they said, well, it's a humbucking pickup. We own the patent on it, or at least it's been applied for. And then apparently
I got a question about that, though.
Okay.
I need to interrupt. was there, and I don't know everything about pickups, I admit, but did Filtertrons not run in parallel?
I always thought that, but they actually they run in series.
Run in series?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, they do. And I always thought it was because of the low output and the brightness. Just so everyone knows what we're talking about, when you have two coils of a pickup, if you run them in series, meaning one coil leads into the lead of the other coil, it creates usually a more mid-rangey, kind of beefy tone, certainly
Single
louder.
path.
Single path.
Single path.
A parallel wired humbucker, you still do
Two
get
paths.
humbucking, but you have basically the leads are, the hot from coil A is tied to the hot of coil B, and the ground and so on. So what generally happens there is it increases the brightness, but it lowers the output. So if you ever play with switch wiring and push pulls and things like that, you can get some really cool tones if you have a 4-conductor lead on your pickup.
That actually works well with P100s.
Oh yeah. Those are sometimes
they're really hot.
Yeah, they're almost too hot. But back to Ray Butts versus Seth Lover. So there was apparently some thought about preventing Gretsch from using Filtertrons, but Mr. Gretsch sat down apparently in private with Mr. McCarty, who was president of Gibson at the time, and they both basically agreed to live and let live. So that means that Gibson was.
Would love to have been a fly on the wall there.
Oh, I think there was probably a little heat initially.
Yeah.
But, truth be told, both were developed at probably the same time. And it was just a natural thing. Any engineer that said, oh, well, let's see if we can get rid of some of the 60-cycle hum.
Yeah.
And that's how you did it. Mm-hmm. But I always found that interesting. And, Ray Butts, of course, doesn't get the credit I think that he deserves sometimes.
Right. Well, they sound wildly different.
Oh, yeah, they're totally different pickups.
Yeah.
Yeah, and part of it is because Gretsch pickups are lower wind, lower output.
Right.
And Gibsons are usually higher wind and more output and thus more mid-rangey. In the 1960s, kind of to replace the Dynasonics, because Gretsch didn't want to buy them from Diarmond at that time, they developed what they call Hylotrons. And basically the Hylotron is their version of it's a simplified version of a Dynasonic.
Yeah.
But they put those in some of their lower end models, and they're actually really cool pickups. I like, the Hylotrons. Steve, you probably had a couple that have Hylos, right?
I did. I don't anymore, but you're right. They are unique.
Yeah, I mean, if you like the sound of like the Diarmonds,
what's the sound that we're talking about here?
It's a single coil sound.
Okay.
So they're a little noisier, but it's brighter.
Right.
It's more Stratish or Telly-ish.
Okay. Is that reminiscent of what we would have seen like in a lot of the '60s, like Japanese style guitars? Those like all kinds of crazy single coils.
Well, these were better made, I think.
Okay.
I mean, there's definitely a higher quality, and they Gretsch put them in a lot of their Corvettes. The solid body guitars. They even put them in like the Tennessean. And again, it was just I guess a cost savings thing instead of putting a full humbucker in. Towards the end of the 60s, they also developed what were called Supertrons. And those are just kind of higher output Filtertrons. And you know they're Supertrons because they have a bar instead of pole pieces. So, when you see something like that has a blade on both sides
Right.
instead of pole piece.
Was that one of the first blade style?
It probably
pickups?
was. I mean that came out in probably the 68. I'm pretty sure that was an early development of using a blade instead of pole pieces, because you really don't see that until probably the 70s when Bill Lawrence was doing things with blades, and and then of course other people have done it over time.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
So
Okay.
those are the
Pickups.
I mean there's other pickups too, and
Yeah,
there's
they
some
got
stuff that were made in Japan and that we won't get into that came in the 70s and things
Right.
like that. But these are, and to me, are the four main pickups.
And
that
without getting into this in great detail, and then you have someone like TV Jones basically coming in and playing a huge part in that as well as far as that
yeah,
style
Tom
pickup.
came in. I mean, he was hired by Gretsch to basically redevelop, reverse engineer the Dynasonics.
Gotcha.
For Gretsch Japan or
Okay.
Terada.
Right.
And but then he also TV Jones, Tom Jones, is probably the most knowledgeable guy when it comes to Gretsch pickups. I mean, he knows them inside out and
Sure.
has incredibly good, well-made.
And a great line for all kinds of varying tastes on what you might like.
Yes.
With that kind of style of pickup.
Yeah.
All right. What's next?
Well, Gretsch never really developed their own vibrato. There's a lot of guitar models, like the 6120s, that have Bigsby's. And again, the Bigsby was kind of, would you say an upgrade, Steve, to some of the model line?
I would say it was definitely an upgrade.
Yeah, because they basically, a lot of, you'll see some Gretsch models like country clubs and things like that have a steel tailpiece that has a G cut into it. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of people have taken those off and put Bigsby's in their place. But many were, either factory optional or factory original. So Bigsby's were kind of the, especially on the big, jazz box bodies, that was the standard. Mm-hmm. At some point, they may have had some custom done. I mean, Guild did the same thing with theirs, where they were marked as Guild, but they were made. Obviously, they were made by Bigsby. In the 60s, the only other vibrato that I'm aware of was made by Burns in the UK. And they used those on a lot of their, like the Corvettes, a lot of the solid body things, because those were essentially designed for a flat top solid body guitar. So that's really the only two types that I've ever seen on Gretsch's. Steve, have you seen anything other than that?
That covers the gamut as far as I know.
Yeah. So that's pretty straightforward. How about bridges? Did you say bridges?
How about bridges?
Let's talk about bridges. So, I mean, a lot of the early Gretches have a rosewood bridge, carved rosewood bridge that you'd see on Gibsons, on any, semi-acoustic guitar of the day. But one of the first things they came out with was termed a Melita bridge. And the cool thing about that, it was one of the first adjustable bridges, and it was still, what we would call a floating bridge, because it literally sits on top of the guitar and is held in place by string tension. So there's a base that sits on the guitar, usually two posts that come up, and then the actual saddle piece, and that sits on the top, and that's adjustable. But with the Melita bridge, each of the individual saddles were adjustable to improve intonation. So that was kind of like their take, I guess, on like the Tune-O-Matic that Gibson developed. And it allowed for, again, more accurate intonation. But interestingly enough, this always cracks me up, because at the same time, or maybe a little bit later, they also had what was called the solid bar bridge. And what that was literally, think of like a round lipstick tube that had 6 slots in it and 0 intonation. And we see, I mean, they used it, and a lot of people love those bridges because of their simplicity, but there's no way you can intonate the guitar with that.
And they still use that on some models too.
And they do, yes. There's also, for a period of time, they used the intonated Bigsby bridge. So it's like, the piece on the top was made of cast aluminum, but was not adjustable other than the notches that or the saddles that they molded into that piece. There was also a bridge that came out later in the 60s called the Space Control. And what that allowed for was basically 6 cylinders, I guess, that the string sat on, and you could actually adjust the spacing at the bridge. It didn't really provide intonation, but it did provide, let's just say, the E strings were hanging off the edge of the neck on the upper frets. You could bring those in and then get everything spaced out a little bit better. So, and then of course there's others, the stuff that came out in the 70s, but those by and large are what was used.
Do you think that that's an intimidating factor for a lot of players, is having essentially a floating bridge?
It is, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the idiosyncrasies section.
Okay, perfect.
Because what a lot of people do is it's called pinning the bridge. They pin the bridge in place so that it can't move, or at least the part that goes to the top of the body. And that's actually a pretty good method of making sure that you don't lose or things go. Let's just say the string tension drops, especially if you're using a vibrato, and suddenly the bridge slides towards the neck.
Row.
And then you got bad intonation.
Right.
You got no intonation.
Yeah, or none. Some of the other cool things are the position markers that Gretsch used. Of course, some models just had dots, like any other guitar.
Right.
Earlier, 50s models had blocks, and then some of the models, things like the 6120s, some of them had actually engraved and marked with various like Western theme kinds of things. They did some really cool stuff with their inlays.
Is it fair to say, though, they're kind of known for, I guess, the half moon kind of
towards in the 60s that became the half moons, or the neoclassics as they call them, and it's basically like a thumbnail on the upper on the bass side of the fretboard,
on the low E.
On the low
area,
E. So when you're looking down, you can tell where your fingers are.
Yep.
But the other cool thing that they did on a lot of models, especially on the Jets, they took the block and then they put like a hump on one side of it. So we call it, typically they're called hump top blocks. So it's
it's a hump top block.
Yes, but it's a cool feature, and it's something that nobody else was doing. Yeah, which I think is really kind of says Gretsch. Nothing says Gretsch like a nice hump top block.
Right.
or a thumbnail.
Or a thumbnail.
You like those. All right. Let's talk idiosyncrasies.
Yes, and there are a lot of them.
Yes. I mean, as cool as Gretsch guitars are, they do have a lot of strangeness to them. And some things that people don't like. But,
Can I tell you my thing that I most don't like?
I know what it is, but go ahead.
Oh, you do? What is it?
Probably the pad on the back.
No. Ooh, that's another. It's not that. It's just a weird thing that I don't necessarily understand.
Okay.
I don't know that it's something that I dislike so much. But what I don't like, especially on some of the smaller guitars, like the Jet series, is that the height of the pick guard is so close to the height of the strings. And that is very bothersome to me.
It depends on the era.
It does. Later ones, so more modern ones.
The more modern ones.
I've played two that are modern made.
Yep.
And I I was like, nope, can't do it.
Yeah.
Nope.
Well, the reason that, especially on the newer ones, and mostly they're import ones, is they set the neck deeper into the body. Because if you look at a vintage Gretsch, a lot of times the neck sticks out
Pretty
fairly
high,
significantly.
Yeah. Kind of like a Rick.
Yeah, very much. It's about the same height. And back in the 50s, the material that was used on the pick guards was 3/16 of an inch thick, which is heavy. I mean, I try to keep the stuff. I mean, I do duplicate them in 3/16, but I usually like to use 1/8 inch because
3/16, 4/16, whatever it takes.
Well, an 1/8 is 2/16.
Yes.
But what you're describing, I think, is probably more common on newer models that have a deeper set neck.
Deeper set, and it still has a super thick pick guard. So it's like it's just
Yeah, you run into it.
If you're doing little picking stuff, you're not going to get bothered by that. But as soon as you're doing any chords, it's like, ugh.
Steve, do you have an idiosyncrasy that you like or dislike? Things that bug you about Gretches?
Well, I don't know that this bugs me about Gretches. I think just the controls, the pickup switching and the tone and the myriad of switches that you sometimes have to navigate to get a sound is just it takes some getting used to.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the flip side of that is it gives you some versatility in terms of tone and
Sure.
and selection and that kind of thing, but it does take some getting used to.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's go through the list.
Yes, let's do.
So I just kind of put these together. So the G brand
The big G on the back.
that you see on the front.
On the front.
Like you said,
I meant
by the
towards
back,
the
you
back
meant,
of the guitar. Yeah.
Yeah.
The butt end of the guitar.
Yes, that's
Yes.
the one.
The butt. The G on the butt.
Now that doesn't show up on all models, but a lot of the ones that come to mind are like the True Country 6120s that have the scribed
it
inlays.
looks like a brand.
It's a G brand,
like branding.
Yeah,
Like a
and
cow
originally, interestingly, the original series, the original ones, were actually branded.
No kidding.
They actually branded. Now later models and the reissues, it's an inlay.
Yeah.
That they scribe in and drop it in. But yeah, the very earliest ones did have a true G burned into the wood.
Amazing.
Yes.
So if you run across something at a garage sale and it looks all janky on the back, buy it. Or don't.
Or don't. Now, this is one of my pet peeves. Although I understand why they do it, and a lot of guitar companies were doing it at the time, is the 0 fret.
Right. That's a weird thing just in general on guitars.
Well, it is and it isn't. Because in theory, it provides a quick way to raise and lower the action because your 0 fret is taller than the rest of the frets on the fretboard. At that point, the nut just really becomes nothing more than a guide. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people have taken old Gretches, Brian Setzer included, and taken off the 0 fret and extended the nut so that it's a true
Nut.
A true nut that also is at the 0 point of the fretboard. But yeah, the problem I think you run into with 0 frets is eventually the strings from their vibration actually start to wear ruts into them, and at some point you have to replace the 0 fret.
Right.
Which generally isn't a big deal, but it's not something that you want to have to do too many times. Otherwise, you start tearing up the rosewood, and it's a mess. So that's my pet peeve.
Standby switch.
Standby switch. That's a cool feature. Although there's so many switches sometimes on some of these models that it's maddening. But the standby switch was really...
Where is that typically located on these models?
Down by the controls, by the bridge.
Okay.
Under the bridge. And what it was meant for, as it would stand to reason, is if you had it either in the down position or the up position, it would basically short the signal to ground and make it quiet.
Right.
So anytime you wanted to play, it would be in the middle position.
Right, because otherwise you stand the the possibility of your guitar going into a howl as you're waiting for the slide guitar guy to finish up.
Yeah. Or if you're in between sets. And
Yes.
you didn't want to have to worry about turning down the volume on your guitars and such.
In lieu of a tuner pedal.
In lieu of a tuner
This
pedal.
is a good option.
You got to remember, this is the 1950s and
get
60s.
it. I get it.
Okay. But it's actually kind of a cool feature, but as Steve said earlier, the myriad of switches and knobs and things can be maddening. And once you learn the guitar, to work with the guitar, it starts to make sense.
I resorted to using my neck pickup in the Les Paul Special as the very same thing. I just turned the volume all the way down in a neck pickup because I never use it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was just sort of like all right, I'm standing by.
Standing by.
Yeah.
Another
Tone toggle switch.
Yeah, that's, in my opinion, can be a little limiting because basically it's a three-way switch that a lot of people call them mud switches because the values of the caps that are used on them can be just really non-useful. And it basically allows the player to have either straight open, or on one side it goes through one series of caps and resistors, or to the other side. And basically it's there just to change the tone at like a preset level.
Okay.
And again, it's not for everyone.
That's
because
a cool doohickey.
It's a doohickey that doesn't necessarily enable every player to use it usefully.
Is it arguable that it might have been more useful for jazz and maybe
Possibly.
slower country kind of stuff, like
Yeah.
old timey country?
Yeah, I mean, it's in some ways it's not that much different than the old Esquires that had one pickup, but it still had the switch,
Right.
And you would go through a series of mud,
Right. Yeah.
none, or straight out to the output jack.
Gotcha. Okay.
Master volume. So this is another thing that gets confusing to a lot of first-time Gretsch players,
Right.
Because
Because now you got a knob.
there's a knob usually near
There's
the
a knob,
cutaway.
there's a knob. Everywhere's a knob on a Gretsch.
But in addition, you've got other volume controls, usually for each pickup. And then sometimes there's another knob for the tone. And it's just, there's a lot going on. And it's
kind
not
of like getting into sliding into a vintage car and just going like, what are all these knobs and controls? I love it.
what does this switch do?
Yeah, I don't know. Nothing now, but it's cool.
But it's, I think it's useful maybe in live situations where you need to take a little bit off the guitar, but still maintain the balance of the pickups. I don't know. I
Said me never.
full open. But so that's kind of an oddball thing. One of the truly, I think, useless things that Gretsch developed was
Why don't you talk about the mute?
That's what I'm going to talk about. Pop music. So the string mute.
It was like a piano.
Well,
It's probably inspired by the piano, I imagine.
very much. I mean, I find the same uselessness on Fender Jaguars that have a string mute
String damper.
or damper
Yes.
mute, whatever you want to call it. It was there to, in lieu of using the palm of your hand to kind of dampen the strings,
Right?
you would flip the switch and the mute would come up and deaden the strings. So
Right.
you could do.
I was just gonna say that's like the like sort of the playing the Johnny Cash rhythm on the electric.
Yeah, sorta. I
You know?
guess. I've never found any of those to be useful. In fact, any Jag that I've had, that's the first thing that comes off.
That'd be wearing out so fast. I would imagine if you're using it a lot, pretty soon it's just creating grooves in it, and then
Well, it's just a rubber pad, yeah. So you have to replace the pad.
it's rubber. I thought it was felt.
No,
Okay, interesting.
rubber.
Okay,
So
glad we cleared that up for
Yeah.
everybody out there. Painted
they-
F-holes.
yes.
What
So
the hell?
some models I don't know why.
That is just the
It's possible.
dang dumbest thing I can think of. But
Well,
there's an endearing factor to
The
it.
only thing that I can think of, the reason they did it is probably because in a live situation to prevent feedback.
I think that was actually an innovation that Chet Atkins came up with.
Oh, really?
I believe so.
Okay.
Precisely for that reason, to prevent feedback.
Okay.
But why paint them on?
Because that was the
Style?
Gretsch style. Yeah,
Yeah.
the look. I mean, George Harrison's 6122, the brown one.
Yeah.
That was his, or was that a 6119? Oh, God, I can't think now. 6122, I think.
Can you give us a name?
The Country Gentleman.
Thank you.
And it, the one that he used in the Beatles early on, it had painted F-holes.
Right.
And again, I think you're right, Steve, Chet Atkins. A real unusual thing was the floating sound bridge unit. And that is something I've never used one, so maybe somebody out there has and can tell me why it's a thing. But it was an apparatus that was loosely based on a tuning fork that went between the bridge and the neck, closer to the bridge, and it was there to supposedly increase sustain. But it looks like to me it would actually deaden the strings. I don't know. I don't. That's one I just don't get. And that didn't appear on a lot of models, but you see it on some of the late 60s into the 70s. And I that's one I don't get. Maybe somebody can explain that. This is a good one because a lot of people think, when you get into the Jet series, they had a lot of sparkle material. Mm-hmm. Even the first run of the black Duojets, they had. Oh, and this is another thing. We talked about this a while back. What do you think Duojet means, Todd?
Well, at first I thought it was like a double cut.
Yes.
But I'm assuming it's a dual humbucker.
2 pickups.
Right.
So, yes.
Okay.
And there are Duojets that have single cuts and Duojets that have double cuts.
Which is very confusing.
Yes. Again, this is all about Gretches. But the tops on those Jet models were actually drum wrap material.
Interesting.
So it's glued on the same stuff that they, went down the hall where they were wrapping drums. They said, "Hey, cut me a piece of that off, and we'll put it on this guitar." But the very first black Duojets also were black drum wrap material. So that's kind of a cool thing.
Oh, that's neat.
Subsequently, they finished them in black.
Sure.
But even the reissues now, the Sparkle Jets and things like that, they are done with drum wrap material.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Well, now you know.
I
And
do.
now, Todd, your favorite,
Oh.
the snap-on pad on the back.
Snap-on pad on the back, which I brought up a couple episodes ago. The first time I picked up a White Falcon.
Yes. So some of the model lines.
So confusing.
Well, it was there for player comfort, apparently. It also provided a cover for the hatch that they used at the factory to wire these things. So if you pull a cover off on most models, especially the semi-hollows, you will find a little hatch, and then
It's not like there's a giant hole in the back.
No.
Yeah, but that's misleading because you're like, why is this thing covering up a giant hole?
Yeah.
That's what I couldn't figure out.
Well, you see,
I didn't pull it off because it wasn't my guitar.
You see the same kind of pads on Voxes. That was kind of a thing. It was, it rested against your gut and, it was nice and soft and padded.
Okay,
It's good for some people.
Sure.
Not for everyone.
it just seemed like like it would be counterintuitive, like it would be killing the resonance of the guitar,
I guess to some degree.
which is partially why you want one of those big giant guitars, is like that extra.
But Les Paul was able to do it by mounting a neck to a 2x4 or a 4x4. So really, resonance is
Okay.
all relative. It's all about the pickup.
Sure. Yeah.
The other thing about the snap-on rear pads is most vintage pieces that you find today, they're either missing or they're just falling apart. and there really aren't good replacements being made out there. So, I mean, it could be an opportunity for somebody that, knows the pattern of where the snaps are and can sew these things together.
Somebody on Etsy's got to be making one.
Yeah. I mean, well, Gretsch puts them on some of their models currently. Not a lot of them, but yeah, there's definitely a need for some people. I mean, they go for big money if they're in good condition on the Bay of E. Todd, what would you like to talk about next?
Well, I think we've talked about a lot of things. Let's take a sidetrack into some of the known players. We talked about like why this, but this list of players that are known is pretty extraordinary. And
this is just a very small list. I mean,
it is, but the ones on this list, for the most part, have a distinct playing style and sound. Not everybody on this list, but here's a couple. Why
don't you read them?
Why don't we read them? Chet Atkins.
Goes without saying.
Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, he is
finger-picking father.
He's the foremost Gretsch guitar player. He's had more models named after him, has played more different styles, helped develop many of the models that are out there.
Yeah.
He's the
Eddie Cochran and Dwayne Eddy. We can kind of loop those guys in the same sort of era.
It was that same rockabilly era. Eddie Cochran, of course, was known for Summertime Blues.
Yeah.
People might remember that song.
Dwayne Eddy is often also credited a lot by British players. I don't know exactly, why, but...
Yeah, well, I think that it is that kind of rockabilly thing. Now, Dwayne Eddy originally did play Gretsch's. He subsequently did a deal with Guild Guitars.
Yeah.
Basically the same guitar that Guild was making.
I believe he went back to Gretsch, didn't he?
He might have, yeah.
I believe he did.
We got Bo Diddley.
George
Harrison.
Well, I'll go back to Bo Diddley.
Bo Diddley.
So Bo Diddley, originally, his first Gretsch was a Jet Firebird, which is the Jet series, single cut, with a red finish. He worked with Gretsch to develop the rectangular guitar, which he made the very first one himself, very crudely. I think it's in 108 guitars.
Yeah.
That Lisa Johnson did.
And that wasn't red. That was natural, if I recall. The first one he made.
No, the rectangular one.
Yeah.
But if you go back to when he first started recording and things like that, he played a red Jet Firebird.
Yeah. I'm saying the rectangle one that he made.
Oh, it
was natural color.
Yeah, it was raw wood.
But the Gretsch Bo Diddley model was red.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then he also did the Jupiter, which again was made popular by Billy Gibbons.
Yeah, that's a weird guitar, man.
It's an odd shape.
We got George Harrison.
Well, you go back to the very beginning.
Yep.
His first was a black Duojet.
Yep, riding high, playing it high.
And then he went over to the Country Gentleman,
Brian
the brown one.
Jones.
Brian Jones played several
But
different
probably more
Gretches.
famous for the Vox Teardrop.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of photos of him playing White Falcon.
Yep.
And
Michael Nesmith, the Monkees.
there you go. Let's talk a little bit about the Monkees. Because Gretsch offered, was it United Artists or whoever did the Monkey series,
Yep.
an endorsement deal where they supplied the guitars for the TV show. And those of you who don't know who the Monkees were, they were basically kind of a spin-off of the Beatles based in America that was kind of a combination of A Hard Day's Night and Help kind of rolled into a
It's a TV
weekly
show.
TV series. Yeah, it was silly
Take
stuff.
the last train to
Yeah.
Knoxville.
That's the one. So Mike
It's a Neil
Nesmith.
Diamond song, actually. Yeah, for real.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, Diamond wrote a bunch of stuff for them.
Yeah.
But he had, when you see a lot of the old Monkees things, he's playing a 12-string Gretsch, which was one of the first electric Gretsch 12 strings that they made. But they also did.
He also invented MTV.
Well, he did a lot.
He's credited for inventing
in the
MTV.
video
And
world.
his mother invented Whiteout.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I mean, that's a family right there.
Don't go. I'm not done yet.
You're not done. Okay.
Because they also Gretsch released a series of Monkeys branded guitars. Monkeys model.
Yeah.
Had a Monkey logo on the
was a
on the
cool
pick
logo.
guard and a Monkeys logo on the headstock.
Are
And
those worth a lot, vintage hoarders?
not as much as you might think. I mean, they're sought after. Wouldn't you say?
They are sought
They
after.
probably made a lot of them, I bet.
I don't think they made that many because what I'm told was people would order the guitars and then they would write to Gretsch to see if they could get a plain pickguard because they didn't want to be seen
Monkeys logo on it.
playing
Yeah.
the Monkeys model, which is a shame because it's a great guitar. I mean, no matter how
They're
you
going
slice
for
it.
about $3,000 on the internet right now. On
That's
eBay
not
and
a lot of
stuff.
money in my opinion. I mean, for a vintage
No.
guitar like that.
I think that'd be cool.
Okay. What else you got?
What do those people know?
Yeah.
Let's see here. What else do we have? We've got, we got a long list. We got to get through this here. Pete Townsend,
Yes.
whatever.
He used 6120 on at least two
Neil
Who
Young,
albums. Neil Young.
heard of him?
Who's that?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
David Crosby, Stephen Stills.
So the three of those
So
together.
the whole Buffalo
Springfield, the Birds,
all those guys.
Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
Malcolm Young.
Yeah, Mal, I was
That's-
just gonna say Malcolm Young, man. He had just a bridge pickup in his. It's all he needed.
Well-
just a bridge pickup.
But even beyond that, so that was originally a Jet Firebird,
Yeah.
similar to what Bo Diddley played, only this was a double cut.
Yeah.
Over the years, he'd put various pickup combinations, and if you look at his original guitar, I mean, it is just
mess.
literally routed out, and it is a true mess.
Yeah.
But it worked for him. He got rid of all the switches, put one pickup in, wired it to the output jack, and
There you go.
played the rhythm guitar.
And the great Billy Duffy from the Cult.
Yes, there you go. Well, that's your personal favorite, right?
Followed by Billy Zoom. Those are my dynamic duos right there.
Yeah, Billy Zoom,
From
known
X.
for his silver sparkle jet.
So cool.
Yes, he's a cool dude.
Brian Setzer, Stray Cats.
I
Brought
think
big band back
brought
single-handedly.
rockabilly back, brought
Yeah.
Gretsch back, I think, in a
Yeah.
lot of cases.
You got Poison Ivy from the Cramps.
Oh, yeah.
The
Got
big
it.
orange. Now she was playing. What model was she playing? 'Cause
I think it
it
was-
was always orange.
I
Like,
think
she
it was a
never
6120.
deviated, really. Yeah,
I
okay.
think it was.
And you got Jack White.
Jack White, not so much in the white stripes, but in the Raconteurs, he
Yeah.
played the triple jet. So it was a jet with three pickups in it.
Right. Tim Armstrong from Rancid.
Yep. He played an old, might have been like an old Town and Country or Anniversary or something.
All
that-
painted black.
Painted flat black.
Yeah, painted flat black. Patrick Stump from
Fallout Boy. Then he brought back interest in the Corvette, the solid body Corvette. That was his artist model. I think has racing stripes on it.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Dan Arbach from the Black Keys.
Yeah. Again,
Yeah.
he's
kind of
known
more famous for the Trini Lopez kind of model, though, isn't he?
No.
No? Okay, good.
No, he's known for unusual guitars.
Okay.
Dave Grohl was known for the Trini Lopez.
I don't know. You might want to check up on your facts there.
You can check it
let's see. I'm calling Tony out on that one. Pitfalls. Let's talk about
All right,
pitfalls.
so let's just say you are in the market for a vintage Gretsch.
I'm in the market for a vintage Gretsch, Tony.
Okay. Here's what
What
to
should
watch.
I be watching out for?
Well, first off,
I suspect the binding is going to be an issue.
the binding is the issue in almost every vintage Gretsch that I've seen.
That's a shame.
Yeah. And again, this goes back to the nitrocellulose kind of falling apart.
What is the number one thing you think is a pitfall on the Gretsch guitars, Steve?
In terms of a vintage Gretsch,
Yes.
I would have to concur that it's, well, two things. Number one would be the binding. Number two would be the inconsistency with which they were manufactured or assembled.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you just have to be very careful of and look at the one you're thinking about buying to make sure that it's going to stay put together.
Gotcha.
So you'd want to email pictures to either Steve or Tony Bolonska if you were.
I don't know that we want to open that up, but
Well, all I can say is many.
Well, you or I, Todd.
Yeah.
yeah,
you
but
know.
send them to Jared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jared,
I just tell you to buy a Gibson.
Brandon, pickup guy.
Yeah.
I see a lot of problems with the binding, and it's not a cheap fix. Is
it all over, or I mean, because
Yeah.
most the Gretches are like bound everywhere,
Yeah, well, front and back.
neck,
It's-
headstock.
You know,
the whole 9 yards.
The interesting thing is I see less problems with like the glitter binding that they used on like White Falcons and things like that. But you go to a guitar show and you'll just see binding rot. And you know, it's not every guitar, but there's a lot of them that have that problem.
So if you really wanted to have a nice vintage player, you would probably look for one that's already been repaired. Right, as far as the binding goes.
Yeah, but
or other
most
things.
people won't fork over the money to have the binding repaired. It's an expensive, painful process that actually devalues the guitar. Believe it or not.
Naturally, but at least it's fixed.
But it's fixed and playable and should be good for another 50 years. The other pitfall you'll see a lot are the pick guards themselves, since they're made from clear material, generally speaking, clear painted on the backside, and they crack. They don't shrink so much because acrylic generally doesn't shrink, but because you put a screw into acrylic, Lexan, whatever you're using, and tighten it up, and it's going to crack. I mean, it's just plain and simple. So I always warn people that if I make a replacement guard, I said, do not crank the screw down as tight as you can get it, because it's going to be a problem. I think bridge shifting, we talked a little bit about that. One of the fixes is to pin the bridge into place. And what that means is there's two little points that go down into the top of the guitar and anchor it into place. And the only downside of that is if somebody pins it in the wrong spot, and let's say they had the guitar set up with 12s and you want to play 10s, the intonation's going to be off. So know what gauge strings are on that vintage instrument if the bridge is pinned in place.
Flat wound 13s.
Yeah. I mean, people put all sorts of things on there.
Right. What's next?
The drum wrap tops, which we talked about a little ago, sometimes that material comes loose, bubbles. So you just have to kind of, that's pretty obvious when there's a problem. I had one that was actually a reissue that it literally was coming off around the edges. And I managed to actually heat it off, use a heat gun to take it off, sand it down, and I had it refinished in black. But, again, that devalues the instrument. So watch out for that. And then, I hate to talk poorly about an era of those guitars, but the Baldwin era guitars are just not known for high quality consistency.
Don't even buy it.
Buy at your own risk. Wouldn't you say, Steve?
Absolutely.
There's just some weird stuff that came out in the 70s during the Baldwin era that, I've owned a couple of them, and they're okay for a player instrument, but in terms of, let's just say you want an investment instrument, that's not the era to invest in.
What else is left? Lastly,
I'm out of breath. I need more whiskey. Whiskey for my horses, water for my men. Something like that. Let's talk about unsung heroes in terms of in the world of Gretsch. I think the first person that comes to mind is Jimmy Webster.
why?
Well, he joined Gretsch pretty early on. in the 1940s. He worked kind of part-time. He was also a piano tuner, an instructor, a recording artist. In the 1950s, he came on more as a full-time person. But the coolest thing about Jimmy Webster is he was one of the earliest people to use what he called the touch system. Now, some of you people might be familiar with a gentleman by the name of Edward Van Halen, who used a similar, although uncredited, system that Jimmy Webster was doing in the 1940s and 1950s. And Jimmy Webster goes a point further.
Is that where Top Jimmy comes from?
I don't know.
I wonder. Go ahead.
But Jimmy Webster actually credits Harry DeArmond, who started DeArmond Pickups, as the first person that he saw doing this touch tap kind of system and using your thumb to play the bass lines. So it was, there's some really, if you do a search out there, there's some cool videos and some recordings. And it was one of the things when he was employed by Gretsch, when he would, contribute to catalogs and different things like that, where he would, discuss his method, or the method he used. But above and beyond that, he's responsible for a lot of different innovations. And I think what he did for Gretsch was he brought the, much like Chet Atkins did, but he brought the angle of an artist and cool things that you could do on the with the guitars and the electronics and different things like that. So
Gotcha.
So that's why I'm calling him an unsung hero. My second unsung hero is Duke Kramer. Now, Duke was hired in the 1930s. As I just reread all this stuff, and he was really early on. And he was, eventually became like floor manager and different things like that. Maybe, I know that he was heavily involved, at least through the 1960s. He kind of retired after the Baldwin debacle. He was actually brought back on. Now, imagine at this time, he's probably in his 60s or 70s. And the cool thing about him is he helped reestablish in the 1980s into the 90s the Gretsch product line, because he had probably an encyclopedic memory of things that Gretsch did over the years. Thinking from the 1930s to the 1980s. That's a 50-year span there. But what was really cool is after he retired for a second time, he had a ton of parts and things. He ended up in Cincinnati, and he had anybody that needed pickups, necks, unfinished bodies, different things like that. He had a warehouse apparently filled with this stuff in Cincinnati. I'm sure now it's all long gone. But it's he was just he was apparently a pretty cool guy, and in a lot of the he's interviewed pretty heavily in a lot of the Gretsch books that are available out there, and he's got a pretty cool story.
All right, who else you got?
Well, we talked a little bit about Ray Butts.
Yep.
Arguably the first or second person to develop the commercial humbucking pickup. So I think he's often not credited. So I wanted to just give him a little credit. We already talked quite a bit about him.
He gets none. Well, none for me anyway. You can credit him all you want, old buddy.
I will. And lastly, there was a gentleman by the name of Dan Duffy, and he was brought into Gretsch in the 1950s as initially as like a quality control guy. And I think the one thing that he obviously had other positions after that. And he's another guy that was interviewed pretty heavily in books. But he, I think he shared some stories in the interviews where, and I think it speaks volumes about what between Duke Kramer, who was there at the time, and some of the other management team. They were really, really focused on quality control at a time when quality control really didn't exist, if you want to call it that. And I think one of the things that he did, you probably, anybody that's bought a Gretsch has seen the little hang tag that has the quality control checks, and it has people's initials and check marks and different things like that. He helped establish that program. And there was a time apparently where they were having problems with shrinkage and problems with finishes, especially on the White Falcon line. And
The water was cold.
it probably was. He shared a story about how the entire management team came together to fix the problems. And they, any kind of manufacturing, I mean, they're in Brooklyn, New York, making guitars. And it's cold in the winter, hot in the summer.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting thing, but I think it spoke volumes, at least the stories that I read, that they were really committed at that time, especially in the 50s and 60s, and those certainly are the classic years, in my opinion, and probably most people's opinion, for Gretsch guitars.
All right. So I got a couple questions just for Tony, you, and Steve.
Okay.
As far as the Gretsch guitars go, we've talked about all aspects of them. We've even talked about the it factor. For you, what is the magic that Gretsch holds for you? Steve, how about you?
I would go back to, I suppose, what I said earlier. For me, the magic is I like the
Aesthetic.
tactile dimension of a Gretsch, because it is big, and I'm 6'4", so I like a big guitar.
Right.
So there is that element.
Was there, of the people that have played them throughout history, did you lock onto one person where you said, "Ooh, that's the one. I kind of want to know what that's like"?
I think what brought my attention to Gretsch was David Crosby of the Byrds, George Harrison of the Beatles, Neil Young and Stephen Stills of Buffalo Springfield.
Right.
And that, to me, kind of moved Gretsch from strictly a country-based or country-focused instrument. That brought it into the rock era for me, or the rock dimension, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. I can see that. Because that was a pretty big leap from Chet Atkins to any of those
Young,
guys you just named.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tony?
I mean, the ornamentation that you talk about, I mean, generally speaking, I don't like gold hardware. I don't like a lot of fancy things.
Why not, buddy?
That's just me. But I
love
will
gold.
say, you look at a White Falcon, for instance.
It's stunning.
It is. It's more than a guitar. It's a piece of art.
Yeah.
And I mean, they've packed everything they can into it. It's still essentially the same guitar as whether it's a single cut or double cut. It's in the same realm of those things. But it is so over the top. I mean, the sparkle binding, the gold hardware. It's just all the knobs, all the switches. It's just.
It's almost unapologetically garish.
Yeah. I would say that's a fair assessment. So again, find it. Ideally, it's somewhere you can drive to, hold the guitar, look it over, play it, and there's a lot of great places in a lot of great dealers in across the country that you can do just that. And I don't think it's going to set you back a ton of money, but if you're looking for what I would call a decent bargain, look for the 90s to the early 2000s Japanese Terada made. They'll have a serial number that begins with the letter T or JT. I forget which. They did them, I think, both ways, and those are fantastic instruments. A lot of people buy even some of the newer models. I've done it myself, and pop in TV Jones pickups.
Yeah.
Or some other good Filtertron pickup, because some of the lower line models, the pickups aren't as good. But it's a good pathway. I know, Steve.
Well,
you've
it's
done
the
that
same
a few
thing
times.
as by getting an Epiphone or a Squire or something like that.
The
There's gonna
Japanese
be-
really, they make
Well, I
really
mean,
good
the low. I'm
guitars,
talking about the entry model.
Yeah, like the
Yeah.
2000
Gretches.
series or
Yeah.
the 5, even the 5000 series. In fact, in some cases you have to. There's an adapter plate which TV Jones actually makes if you want to mount his traditional Filtertrons into one of those era models.
They call them an adapter kit.
Adapter kits.
All right. Well, hopefully you are all enlightened. I know I learned quite a bit, and I'm excited by these guitars still. Hope to have one someday.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, and if you have ones that you especially like, please share them. Send them out. Like, give us a holler. Say,
Send
I
photos.
love this. And yeah. All right. Well, we know this one was long. Hopefully you're still listening, but we think it was worth it because there was an awful lot to talk about. And it's getting late. However, we are still going to jump into the El Camino and hit the road and swing by Jared's house, and he's going to take us for a ride.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you step out of the Camino to my house, I would like to read a Would You Rather from executive producer Don Kloss. Would you rather? So Don asks the question, a serious would you rather,
Serious.
if you like to consider it in that way. He owns a Dan Electro Convertible that he was told was made sometime between 63 and 67. He got it at a flea market for $15.
It's a good deal.
Yeah. Inside, it has a stamped serial number of 2036. So 2036. I would like to use it, but the stock bridge is really useless. And the stock tailpiece is also pretty much garbage and has surface rust on it. When I play it, it sounds like a combination between a banjo and an acoustic guitar that has a cardboard box for a body. So would you rather put upgraded hardware on this thing, try to restore it, or should it just be a historical conversation piece with his collection? And he says, thanks in advance for your answers. And he tells us to keep on knobbing.
Yeah.
So let's help him out, man. Let's
So
do
is this
that.
a 3-choicer?
It's a 2-choicer, either a historical conversion or a conversation piece,
Keep it the way it is.
Or-
It as is.
or actually upgrade it
Now,
and ruin the historical value, possibly. I don't know.
so the Dan Electro Convertible is sort of like a double cut, and people are probably familiar with the recent Telecaster, the Fender that was like acoustic, but it was like, electric size body that came out that was really popular about like three years ago. That I think that kind of broke out at NAMM. Similar in fashion, it is a very thin body, and also the Dan Electro is at those are composite bodies, right? That's correct. So it's a thin composite body with a relatively small acoustic hole in it with a lipstick pickup bridging it.
Correct.
So this is a little bit of an oddball guitar. I'm curious. I've never heard one. I can't imagine they sound awesome. I think they would kind of sound a little weird, right? Maybe I'm wrong.
Well,
They
he
sound
explained
awesome.
it.
Do they?
He said it sounds like an acoustic guitar that has a cardboard box for a body.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So, anyways, but it's still a unique piece, and a lot. They came in various styles and colors, but mostly light colored.
Yeah.
Seems like.
Yeah.
There's a couple with the antique sort of blue Dan Electro. They did it on the Longhorn as well. right?
Well, they did a copper burst, and I mean, there are also some reissues of the convertible,
Yeah.
that are out there too,
Yeah.
which are actually,
Probably better made.
well, I mean, here's the problem with old Dan Electros is it is masonite top and back, and poplar frame, and as time goes on, time is not kind to masonite.
Yeah.
But that being said,
I think Mick Jagger said that.
yeah, I think so.
Time is not kind.
Time is not kind
Yeah.
to masonite. You've probably heard that song before.
Okay, keep going.
I will. But the model of the guitar is actually pretty cool. Now, I would probably assume. Let's just assume that the neck is in good shape. The body is in relatively good shape. It's solid. It's not, caving in or anything like that. I think it would be a good candidate to try to do a restore on. There are some replacement parts, mostly because there were, the reissues were out there, I guess back in the 90s, the 2000s. I can't even remember.
90s, I believe.
Yeah. And so you might be able to find some of the parts. This particular guitar has kind of a unique bridge in terms of what Dan Electro was using. I mean, some of the old, original series, the U2s and things like that, they basically have a piece of rosewood mounted to a piece of metal that you can raise and lower. This one, at least, is kind of it actually has a saddle on it, I think. And
Very rudimentary guitar.
they always were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this one's especially, it seems like.
Yeah, but it's got a lipstick in the neck position. Yeah. I mean, if that doesn't work, if it still doesn't sound good, hell, route out and put another pickup near the bridge. Why not?
Okay. So that's what you're doing?
I'm going to restore it.
You're going to restore it. All right. Steve, what are you doing?
I think I'd concur with Tony. I think I'd restore it rather than try to convert it into something gig-worthy. If you want a gig-worthy guitar, get a gig-worthy guitar and keep the historicity of this one intact.
That's a $20 word.
Yeah.
Is it?
I think you just coined that.
Historicity.
Yeah, I got one of those about 20 years ago.
Damn.
That was painful, too, wasn't it?
Anyways. Jared,
No, it is safe.
Jared, what are you doing?
I think it depends, just like Tony and Steve say. If it's a candidate, then I think I would definitely restore it just to see what it's got. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I couldn't not know what it's going to sound like in good condition.
Yeah, and it's not something that you'd want to put a Tune-O-Matic bridge or something on, or whatever.
Yeah, don't carve it all up and screw it all up. Just if you can find hardware that fit on the guitar without altering the actual guitar to lose its value, then I probably wouldn't do it. But to keep its value, unless you knew you're gonna keep it forever, but you don't want to butcher it all up just to see what it sounds like. I mean,
What?
find the right tools to restore it properly, or leave it alone. That's exactly what I would do.
So both.
Yes. Whatever it takes.
Good candidate.
I'm going to hang it on the wall and fix it up.
Well, the reason I'm giving this answer is because he's, our guy here, Don. He really wants to know what to do.
He does.
With
This is a true thing. This is his scenario. It's for real.
Yeah.
Let's not play with
so
this
it's
man's life, ladies and gentlemen.
I know. So that's my answer right there.
Yeah.
In make believe land,
I'd get it in a working condition.
I'd
Period.
restore
Just
it,
do
I
it.
guess.
I don't need any wall hangers. I think it's a guitar. Figure out what it does. Play it. Make it. Get it player ready.
Yep.
Have some fun.
That's
if you don't
right.
like it, sell it. Bada bing, bada boom.
Is that your answer?
That's my answer.
Final answer. Locked in.
All right, Tony, we got to thank a few people before
Yes, we do,
run
Todd.
out of tape on this
And vocal cords.
show.
So, at this point of the show, there's a special group of people we like to thank. Mm-hmm. These people make the show possible. These are our executive producers.
That's right.
Now, you might want to become one of these special people. Go over to patreon.com/the Guitar Knobs. Check out a couple of levels in which you can participate, become a sponsor, a patron of this very podcast. There's some really great thank you prizes. But you know what's the best thing, Todd?
What?
Jared?
You get to have your name read on the thing.
Your name read on the thing. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Moon Guitars, Vader Pedals, Drew Lopez, John Halverson, Rick Calhoun, Trevor Gunberg, Elad Mizrahi, Jason Rausch, Mike D, Richard Kendall, Mark Garton, Matt Hart, James White, Justin Jones, Anthony Gemalero, Bill Gola Guitars, John Esterly, Anthony Lathrop, Stefan Lamb, Michael Senchuk, Ken Sayers, Doug Christ, Darren Gregory, John Anglin, Tom Brazen, Rusty Sneeden, Ralph Gottschalk, David Poe, Don Kloss, Gregory Randall, Brett Hogarth. Yes. Are you interrupting me, Todd?
No.
Oh, I didn't think you were, because there's another group of executive producers.
I learned my lesson.
We call them our grand poobahs. These fine people have a fez to place upon their cap. You like that one, don't you?
I love it.
He loves it.
An orange one.
An orange one. So special thanks to these grand poobahs. Tommy Manasco, Ricardo Higuereta, David Kaminga, Brandon Wound Pickups,
That's right.
Hex Matos, Michio Murakishi, Bob Crouch, Jack Cadian, Sam Jett, Tyler Rhines, LSJ Music Company, John Williams, James Pennington, Adam Johnson, Steve Keys, Cody Foster, Science of Sound, Brian Robinson, Jonathan Jerusik, Corey Nagro, Michael Van Zant, Tim Nowak, John Daly, Martin Cliff, Sean S. And Eddie Serratos. Thank you.
Indeed.
So much better when you do it, Tony.
It is. It's so much better. So, Tony, where can people find what you need?
Head over to pickguardian.com. Check out some of the stuff that I have available for sale. I do a lot more custom work than anything. So shoot me an email. Let me know what you need, what you're trying to do. And I will probably have some good advice for you. So once you're ready to order, I will take very good care of you.
Excellent. Steve, I know that you've got this thing that you mentioned at the beginning. Is that what do you need to say?
I would just encourage everyone to check out columbushistory.org, and if you're able to attend the exhibit, by all means do so. It's an hour or so well spent. I think you really enjoy it.
All right.
How much longer is that going to be available?
Jared, I believe it's going to run through Labor Day. That's the plan at this point.
I will be there to go see it.
Excellent.
I'm very, very interested.
Excellent.
All
Look
right.
forward to seeing you there.
Jared, where can people find you?
Jared.allen.brandon on Insta. And I may not message you back right away, but I will check and will answer back if you have any questions for me. And I look forward to your inquiries.
You can send me an email, todd@theguitarknobs.com. You can also DM me on Instagram @guitarknobs. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Give us your feedback on this particular episode.
Send pictures of Gretches.
Send pictures of Gretches and whatnot. Yay. Or just tag us in your pictures of Gretches. Why not? Yeah. That'd be cool too. Hey, everybody, have a fantastic guitar week. Thanks for hanging out with us for so long, and subscribe!
Yeah!
Steve!
Well, let's talk about Gretsch Guitars.
Pull the mic out of your mouth, for Pete's sake, so we can hear it at your stomach. I don't mind looking stupid. I just don't want to look like a fool.
Okay. Should I start over?
What the hell are you talking about?
Jared, what did you have for dinner? Everything.
Zaxby.
Steve.
Chicken. Like chickens.
That's what I like to hear. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah.
Couldn't find my mouth. Sorry.
Okay, that's good.
Wait.
Never good enough for Tony Baloney.
I'm a seasoned professional. I need a certain level in order to.
Apparently. Steve!
Well, that's it for these knobs. Please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/theguitarknobs. Visit our website at theguitarknobs.com for all of our past episodes, 4 on the Floor blog, and other good stuff. You can connect with us on social too at our Facebook page and share your gear and stories on our Facebook group. Also, be sure to check out our Instagram at Guitar Knobs. Catch you next time.